Okay, this is week 3 of our 7-week class. Last week we went over the marker word or sound. So you can either use yes or you can use a clicker. And remember, the clicker is not to get the dog's attention, it's to mark that the dog has done something that you like. The same with the marker word. When the dog does something you like, you yes, and then you give them a treat. You also want to have had a release word. Most people use okay. That can kind of bite you in the rear sometimes. If you're talking to somebody else and you say okay in normal conversation, then your dog, being an opportunist, says, oh, that must be for me, and gets up from whatever it's doing. So to avoid that, some people will use free, some people will use release, some people will use done. I use okay, and I've had a dog that I was at the pro shop at the Trainers Academy, and I said okay to somebody. The dog jumps up and goes and gets into something. So I've had it happen. I still use it. It's much handier than try to remember another word. So my release word is okay. All right. So we're going to practice the same things that we have done: attention, go to your mat, the collar grab, loose leash walking, and handling. But we're going to add a stay in, and we're going to expand a little bit on the go to mat. So we've got our marker sound and our release word. So next we're going to practice attention, and it's pretty much the same as last week. We're going to do the airplane game. Now remember, when I do attention, I'm not telling the dog what to do, and I'm not saying the word until the dog is looking at me. You can increase the criteria of when the dog is at 90%, 80%, somewhere around there, which is 4 out of 5 times, the dog is looking at you as soon as you put your hands out and they're looking at your face. Then you can start saying watch me or look or whatever your cue word is going to be. So I'm going to get Jamie up. Here, Jamie. I have treats in both hands. Yes. I'm going to bring it back to center and down there. So as soon as her eyes got on my face, I marked it with yes, and then I brought the food back to my nose and then down to her. So that's just reinforcing. Rather than having the treat here and going to the dog, they're going to keep looking over to the hand. So by bringing it back to the center, that just reinforces where they're supposed to be looking. So you can go ahead and do that. Give that a try. And I'm going to do it a couple of times with Jamie. Yes. 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 Whoops. Remember to bring it back to your center. Yes. Good girl. Okay, so on that last time, I got a little bit of duration. When you're working on behaviors, there's 3 things. There's distance, duration, and distractions. So distance is how far away from the dog you are. Duration is how long you are requiring that behavior. And distraction is whatever the distractions are in the environment. So the key thing for that is you don't work on more than 1 D at a time. So you don't go into a highly distracting atmosphere like a class and expect your dog to do the same level of behavior as it can do at home. So you would take a training step back from where you're at home, and you would require a little bit less duration, a little bit less distance, something like that that you're asking your dog to perform. And that's because the dogs learn by successes. They do learn by failures, but they learn better by succeeding and getting that reward. So you don't work on more than 1 D at a time. I'll show you how to slip that in a little bit later on. So, and during class or in a distracting environment, all I'm going to want to do is have my dog look at me briefly. because they're going to be looking and worrying about everything else that's going on. Yes. Good girl. So just keep that in mind when you're working on any behaviors, that you don't want to get it too complicated and have your dog fail. If your dog is doing really well with the attention, you can start moving a little bit. And that would look like she's watching me really closely. So I can, oh, there, okay. So she's, good girl. So see how she's moving from side to side when I'm moving? So that's too much for her. Yes. So that distraction of moving was too much for her to keep her attention on me. So she was going back to looking back and forth to the hand. So that would be a little bit much for her right now. We haven't practiced this for ages. And she's she's a Velcro dog pretty much. So, but it was too much for me to be moving and her watching my face constantly. So I would take a training step back and just work on her looking a little bit more and add just a tiny, tiny bit of movement. Good girl. Okay, next up is working on the sit. So a lot of your dogs are already sitting well. And we need to work on getting rid of that treat in your hand. So most of the dogs, you have to have a treat and you tell them to sit. Good. Then to get rid of the treat, the next step would be, instead of giving them the treat from that hand you just used to lure, give it to them from the other hand. That way they get used to not getting that treat from that hand. So, hey, Jamie, good. So you would lure and reward with the other hand. Good girl. If your dog is doing really, really well, then you can, here Jamie, have no food in that hand. Give him a hand signal. Whoops. Here Jamie. Jamie. Yes, good girl. And then reward. So that's the third step. First was lure with the treat in your hand and give them the food from that hand. Next is lure with food in your hand, reward from the other hand. Next is no food in the hand, give them a hand signal, reward from the other hand. And that's how you wean the dog off of having to have treats. So go ahead and practice wherever you're at. And remember, don't push the dog too hard. They learn by succeeding and getting that reward.